Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today's video is from a viewer. HOA scheduled a wedding at my house without my permission. Totally illegal. So I hired a demolition crew. This happened in 2016 in New Jersey. And it's funny because this house still exists. You can actually see it on Google Street View. The home in question is 436 Boulevard in Palisades Park, New Jersey. It was purchased by a family who had no idea that it was a designated historic landmark. But now, decades later, they wanted to sell their home, so they put it up for sale. And it didn't take long before an offer was accepted. But then, the buyers got cold feet. Or maybe they just had a change of heart because they backed out of the deal. The new owner was a 34-year-old guy who had just gotten married, and he wanted to move into his new home with his brand new wife. He also had no idea that it was a designated historic landmark. Now, here's the thing about this home. It was built in 1905. That means it's over 100 years old. If you own a home that's over 100 years old, there's always a chance that it could be a designated historic landmark. This is especially true if you live on the East Coast, because so many homes were built back in the early 1900s. Now, it's not illegal to own a historic landmark. In fact, most people don't know that they own one until something happens like a home renovation or a demolition. So our homeowner goes to start renovating his brand new home, and he runs into some problems. He found out that the home was built in 1905, which means that he can't do any renovations without getting approval from the local Historic Preservation Commission. Now, if you're thinking, why does a home that's over 100 years old need approval for renovations? Well, here's why. Homes built during this time period used older building materials that were made from natural resources that are now scarce. For example, these homes used hardwood floors that were made from old-growth trees. Old-growth trees are very difficult to come by these days, because most forests have been harvested several times over. The same is true for things like plaster, which was made from gypsum that was mined in the early 1900s. These materials may be better quality than what we have today, but they're becoming more and more rare, which makes them more expensive. For example, let's say you owned a brand new car that cost $40,000, and then 100 years later, somebody wanted to buy your car because they thought it was a classic. You wouldn't sell it to them for $40,000 because it's worth a lot more. The same is true for these homes. They're not just worth more because they're older. They're also worth more because they're made from materials that are harder to find. And that's why the government gets involved. The government wants to make sure that we preserve these homes so future generations can enjoy them. Of course, this doesn't mean that you can't renovate your home. If you want to renovate your home, you can still do it. But you have to go through a commission that will review your plans and make sure that you're not destroying a historic landmark. But our homeowner wasn't going to let something like that stop him. He went ahead with his plans and renovated his dream home. And when he was done, it looked amazing. But once he moved in, he realized that he made a huge mistake. The home was beautiful, but it was way too big. He had intended to rent out the spare bedrooms, but that wasn't going to happen now, so he put his home up for sale. And after 6 months, it sold for $80,000 less than he paid for it. To make matters worse, the buyer found out about the renovation, and they weren't too happy about it. They tried to renegotiate the purchase price, but our seller refused. Then the buyer threatened to sue him. But ultimately, they decided to walk away from the deal rather than fight it. So our seller had to list his home for sale again. He dropped the price by another $25,000, but still nobody wanted it. After 6 months, he dropped the price by another $75,000, and finally somebody bought it. But the damage was already done. He had already lost $180,000 on the home, and now he had to pay closing costs on top of that. You're probably thinking, why didn't he just listen to the Historic Preservation Commission? Well, here's the thing. He didn't have to listen to them. But every time that he sold his home, he would have to disclose that it was a historic landmark. In fact, if you look up the property on Zillow, you can see the disclosure right there. When you buy a historic landmark, you get what's known as a Mills Act, which basically gives you a break on your property taxes. In exchange, you have to keep the home in good condition, and you and do any major renovations without the Historic Preservation Commission's approval. Our homeowner probably didn't think that this was a big deal, but it turned out to be a huge problem. After all this, you would think that he would be done with this home, right? Well, apparently he still owed money on the home. His mortgage was upside down, meaning that he owed more on the home than it was worth. So his bank called him and told him that he needed to either pay off the loan or sell the home. He decided to put the home up for sale one last time. But this time, he decided to do something crazy. He listed the home for $500,000, which was more than double its market value. Of course, nobody wanted to buy the home at that price, so he kept lowering the price every week. He lowered the price by $10,000 every single week for 3 months, and then he lowered it by $50,000 for the next 3 months. But nobody wanted to buy the home, so he decided to do something else. You see, the backyard was huge. It was over 10,000 square feet, and he thought that somebody might be willing to buy the home if they could use the backyard for something special. He reached out to the local HOA and asked if they could hold a wedding in the backyard. They agreed and scheduled the wedding for June. Our homeowner didn't have a problem with this, except he forgot to tell his tenants. His tenants were 2 guys who were renting the home for cheap because they took care of the yard. They weren't happy that the HOA scheduled a wedding in their backyard. They told our homeowner that they were going to fight it, but he told them to do whatever they wanted. And then he did something that really surprised everybody. On May, a month before the wedding, he hired a demolition crew and started tearing down the house. The HOA sued him for breach of contract, but he countersued them for emotional distress. In the end, the demolition crew finished the job, and now there's nothing left of this home. The story doesn't end there, though. The HOA tried to pursue the lawsuit against our homeowner, but they couldn't serve him with the paperwork. You see, when he filed his countersuit, he gave the court his sister's address instead of his own. And if you try to serve someone with legal documents at their sister's house, the court won't accept it. This meant that the HOA couldn't get in contact with him, couldn't settle the case with him or collect on the judgment. So the case was dismissed, and the HOA was forced to pay his attorney fees. But it doesn't end there. The demolition crew didn't tear down the entire property. There was still a garage left standing and a giant pile of debris. And even though the HOA won the case, they never followed through on collecting the money. Instead, they spent all of their time and money cleaning up the mess. After all this, they had to demolish the garage, haul away the debris, and plant grass seed. All of this cost them tens of thousands of dollars. They said that they didn't want to take his money because they didn't want anything to do with him, so they just ate the cost. But it doesn't end there. A few years later, the town decided to build a park on the empty lot. They asked the HOA to donate the land, but the HOA refused. They wanted to wait until the statute of limitations ran out, which it recently did. So now the HOA has officially given the town the deed to the property, and soon this empty lot will become a park for the community. Now, I'm not saying that this homeowner was in the right. What he did was flat out wrong. But sometimes life circumstances force us to do things that we wouldn't normally do. He lost a ton of money on the home, and he just wanted to get rid of it. Sometimes people make mistakes, and all we can do is learn from them. So I hope you enjoyed this true story from a viewer. And if you did, please leave a comment below and subscribe. Truly appreciate it. Thank you for watching.